Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're just going to be looking at a chess game that I played recently where I absolutely murdered my opponent, this 23-14. This is going to be a little bit of a quicker video today since I don't have that much time, but we're still going to be doing some serious analysis. So I start off the game with the move pawn to d4. My opponent goes with the move knight to f6. A very, very logical move. This is the most common move in these positions, and of course, I play my favorite line here, bishop to g5, the Trempowski attack. And the reason why this move is so nice, these bishop g5s, is because a lot of the time against the people who play knight f6 aren't really aware of it. They're really aware of it. Most people play these c4s. People can sometimes play like knight f3, maybe bishop f4 if they're really fiending for a London, maybe pawn to g3 if they really want to go for a Catalan. But most of the time people see one of those, and bishop g5 is a little bit rarer. My opponent might not know the theory, and it gets into some fun positions. So my opponent thinks for a little bit, probably like 5 seconds, and plays the very logical move knight to e4. Actually, he thinks for 1 second and plays knight to e4, which is okay. And the point is that he's putting pressure on my bishop, which makes a lot of sense. And you're taught at an early age in chess that bishops are better than knights. And a lot of the time, my opponent will just be going to take this and say that, oh, okay, I have the bishop pair, you're going to be worse, I'm going to be happy. But in these Trempowski lines, it's a little bit different because I play this interesting move pawn to h4. Now, this is all theory, and the point is that if my opponent is to take on g5, I'm going to take back with the pawn, and actually what it goes on in the position is that this pawn is going to be a little bit of an asset here. It's going to move up to this square, probably going to get sacrificed for the f-pawn, and it's going to be very, very strong. Also, another point about this opening is that white normally gets a decent bit of center space in moves like pawn to c4, pawn to e4 at some point if my opponent is to take the bishop on g5. So actually in these positions, sometimes you don't want to go with your most natural move, although it is reasonably fine. But my opponent decides to play one of the most combative moves, the move pawn to c5. And of course, the way you're supposed to play against this, if you take on c5 here, then you are going to be probably a bit worse because after dc5, my opponent is going to win back the pawn at some point. He's not going to take it right away. He's probably going to play a move like knight to a6 and win it back like this, develop another piece. You're giving up your center control for a flank pawn, and normally that's not very good. However, the other option against this, which is very, very natural, is the idea of like pawn to c3 or pawn to e3. However, these are not also good moves. And the point is that if pawn to e3, my opponent gets a pretty quick play on the queen side, and this knight is actually very strong to control these squares. It's not what we like to do. So in reality, we have to play this move pawn to d5, pushing forward in the center, stopping my opponent's knight from developing, and gaining a lot of space in the center. My opponent plays queen to b6, very logical, going after this pawn, and I play the very, very nice move knight to d2, which is all theory. And the idea is that I'm going to be sacrificing the pawn on b2. And if my opponent is going to be taking one of my pieces, for example, taking the knight, I come back with the bishop. And after he takes my pawn, I'm going to just argue that I have compensation with the moves like pawn to e4, bishop c4 here, and rook b1, going after this queen and the queen side and the center. The top engine line here is this move pawn to h6. Which doesn't really make much sense to me. I don't understand why the engine says this because I feel like knight e4, hg, and knight g5, and after like queen b2, I feel like this position is just better for white after like something like knight 1 f3. But I mean, I guess the computer is right in this case. Like maybe there's something like this and knight d2. Yeah, but like already, like I mean, I made one natural move, and then advantage is just already here for white. So it really feels like white is just better here because white has the center control, white has the pieces out, white has this rook that's going to come here, and white's not even down a pawn on these lines. So I don't really understand that, if I'm being honest. But okay, my opponent plays the second engine line, which is the move knight takes g5, given as a mistake by the engine. However, it's actually not that bad. As you can see, the engine only changes by around 0.3. At most, it's an inaccuracy. And after h takes g5, my opponent decides to call my bluff and take the pawn on b2. However, my opponent is about to lose. It's already very bad because while these lines are a little bit difficult to play for white, white normally always has an advantage. Unless something goes terribly wrong and I do something like a mistake, if I play a move like, I don't know, if I give black an extra move, if I play a move like knight c4, like for example, I'm already going to be losing. After knight d2, I'm simply down a pawn, and I should lose this position almost all the time. But if I know what I'm doing, if I play my moves right, then normally white is simply better in this position. And okay, we're going to start very simple. I start off with the move pawn to e4, which is normally what you play in these lines. Very simple, taking control of the center and arguing that, okay, my opponent has won a pawn on the queen side, but my opponent has weakened development. My pieces are significantly more developed than his, I guess this rook too. And my opponent doesn't have much center control, which is why my opponent decided here that playing the move pawn to e6 makes a lot of sense. And it does. It makes a lot of sense. The point is very clear. He's trying to, after pawn to e6, he's trying to break apart my center. He's trying to put some pressure on my position. He's trying to make it a little bit difficult for white to play. However, this is a very good example of a move that you shouldn't play in this position. What you should do here with black, and these positions are really, really difficult for him. The move that really immediately comes to mind is already +2, which is ridiculous. Only one move is equal to this 0.5. The move that I would play if I was playing black here, and I mean I'm wrong in this case, is the move queen b6. But this is a +2 advantage for white, which is already like ridiculous. I guess what's supposed to happen is my opponent is probably supposed to take on d2 first here, and after pawn to e4. I'm not supposed to play pawn to e4 here. If I play pawn to e4, my opponent actually gets some pressure on this pawn. So then what is the line? Because there's a line here. Maybe I'm just mistaking it, but okay. Normally there's a line where you go queen back to b6 after taking the pawn on b2 and just argue that you're fine. But in this position, it's actually very, very bad. And the only move here is, again, going to try and get this queen out of the board, out of the middle, and make sure that white doesn't have that much play on it by playing the move pawn to g6, which is really difficult to play. And the point is rook b1, queen g7. And black kind of hangs on to the extra pawn, but like, as you can see, like his position is just awful. He has all these pieces kind of tied up here. It's really, really bad. So the move pawn to e6 makes a lot of sense to me. However, this is also completely lost, and it's really difficult to see where my opponent went wrong, because he really played a lot of natural moves. He took the bishop, and he took a free pawn. But already, he's losing after rook to b1. I was expecting here, in this position, I was expecting to play the move queen to a3, which made a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me. The point is that, okay, I'm probably going to make some pressure, but I just didn't like that. I liked for him that I'm not able to play this move knight to c4 because of queen to c3. And now I don't really have all the pressure that I want to, like queen d2, takes. Yeah, my pieces are significantly more developed, but it's not the position that I would have, like, I don't know, I probably would have gone for this and taken the +1 advantage, but it's like not the most that I can eke out of the position. But with queen takes a2, I immediately realized that my opponent's queen is probably going to be trapped in the position because of a couple simple options. Number one, knight to c4. I figured this out with around a 30-second think. And the point is, my opponent doesn't have a good retreat square. If he goes here, he should lose after... How should he lose this position? After queen a4. Ah, right. After rook h3, my opponent comes around like this. My rook comes around like this, and the queen gets trapped pretty simply. My opponent doesn't really have a good escape square for the queen. My opponent goes queen a6. I was calculating this for a while. I thought that I could play... I thought I would play this move for rook a1. My opponent has to come here, and then I have this check, opening up an attack on the bishop, coming down like this. If we can put that on the board, for example, after queen a4, I go with the move rook h3. I'm coming over to this side of the board, and my opponent's queen is getting trapped. If my opponent goes here, I play the move rook a1. None of these squares are available for the queen to go to, so he has to go queen to b5, and then knight to d6 check is going to be winning. Bishop takes d6, and bishop takes queen. So already my opponent's queen is actually going to be in a lot of danger here, and I realized this pretty quickly. My opponent goes with the move e takes d5, and I decided, okay, I didn't want to calculate every little line. I wasn't sure what happened after queen a4 in the game. Now, obviously, rook h3, but I wasn't entirely sure during the game, so I decided, okay, I could recapture and try to be ballsy and say that, oh, I'm going to win your queen eventually, I'm just going to get the maximum out of the position. Or I thought, okay, I see that the queen is trapped right now, let's just take the queen. So I decided to go with rook a1. My opponent goes queen takes a1 and queen takes a1, and my opponent takes on c4, bishop takes c4, and we enter into the final phase of the game with me being up a queen. Very simply, but my opponent has a decent amount of material. My opponent has a rook and a knight. Well, and a bishop, I guess, in this case, for the queen. So it's still not over. However, the reason why it's +3 for white is because none of my opponent's pieces are developed. And this is very instructive. None of my opponent's pieces are developed. He has absolutely zero development in this position, and he has to do something right away. Knight c6 comes to mind immediately. I'd probably play something like knight f3, and the game still has to be won. I'm going to play something like this, knight g5, go after his king, stuff like this. If he tries to trade the knight, in this case, I'm going to just accept it because it wins a pawn. But okay, let's say knight b4. Now I have to be a little bit careful. Computer immediately says queen e5 is winning, but I don't even know. Maybe even king d2 I would consider playing just to stop this fork here, and then maybe c3. But I don't know. It's a kind of a complicated position, and I have to be a little bit sure of myself if I'm going to be doing anything really. But my opponent doesn't let me think at all and have fun with the position. He instead decides to lose on the spot. And there's around one more good sequence left in the game after this move, but my opponent plays not... Oh, he does play knight c6. Oh, I'm so sorry. He does play knight c6. His hilarious mistake happens on the next move. Okay, knight c6. I play the move knight f3, and my opponent's hilarious mistake happens now with the very, very simple move bishop to e7, hanging the pawn on g7. And already, as you can see, my opponent is about to lose the game. He goes to the move rook f8, and there's one more point where it gets a little instructive, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Of course, first we take the free pawn, piling up pressure against this over here. You might want to trade the rooks at some point. This bishop is still not able to get out at all, so clearly I'm much, much better. If my opponent goes to the move like b6, probably this is the best try, but there's really nothing he can do after rook h8. Even against Stockfish, I can win this pretty easily, because after it takes, I'm probably going to take an f7, not that move, take here, here, and like 95 or at the very least, and oh, okay, like I'm completely winning. Sorry, not 95, probably g6, and I'm just going to be making a new queen. However, my opponent doesn't go for this. My opponent goes knight d4. I think for a little bit. I decide to take on d4, so he takes d4 and capture the pawn on f7. My opponent goes king d8, and I play the move pawn to g6, entering the pawn up the board. I'm going to be playing this move rook to h8 at some point, trade off the rook, and my pawn is going to sneak through and promote. Pawn to a5. Pretty good play. He's trying to make problems over on this side of the board. If he can maybe promote a pawn, then I don't know, maybe he's going to be able to figure something out. But okay, he's not going to be able to do that. I have a queen. I know what I'm doing. I go rook h8. My opponent takes king is c7, and I decide to take on d4 before anything. I could play this move pawn to g7, but I wasn't entirely sure after the move bishop f6 what I was doing here. I missed queen h2 check and win the pawn, but I just thought, okay, he's probably going to sack for the pawn. Like, I thought maybe I'd go for this, here, and like, yeah, I'm winning here, but I'm not absolutely winning. So I decided to go for something a little bit more concrete and take the pawn on d4. And now my idea is very simple. Now I'm going to go pawn to g7, and the queen is going to be unstoppable. Rook a6, pawn to g7. He has no way of defending the queen. If he goes to here, I'm going to go with this check, trade off the rook, and make a queen like that. My opponent goes bishop to b4, pawn to c3, rook d6, queen to c4. And after rook to c6, I just decide, okay, I know I have better ways to play this position, but I think this is the very simplest, the most easy way to play. This is the last destructive moment of the game. Simplification. Simply just simplify. Queen takes c6, dc6, cb4, bishop e6. I decide to just simply make a queen. I could have taken, but I didn't care at this point, so I made a queen. Takes, queen takes, takes, takes. And last little stop to ruin the game. My opponent's best try is, well, I guess he doesn't have a best try because his best try is to go king a5. And the point is, if I make a queen, this is stalemate, which is kind of fun. Not attacking the queen. Here, here, here. It was kind of fun. He should have done this. Instead, he decides to go king a3 for some reason. I don't understand why he would do this. And just to spite him, just because I wanted to be very, very sure of myself, I was going to make a rook anyway. I make a rook, king to a2, and rook to a8. Checkmate. So a very, very simple game for the day. Not too much really goes on. But it is kind of instructive that even if you do everything right, even if you go with all the principles, with saying, okay, bishops are better than knights, so we're going to take the knight, we're going to take a free pawn, your position can get very, very bad very, very quickly, just based off of if you don't look at space advantages, if you don't look at piece activity, and if you get too greedy in the position. So this is pretty instructive. But anyway, that's it I've got for you today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this entertaining, instructive, all of the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, to learn what those YouTubers tell you to, and yeah, that's it. Good evening and good night.